Hello, hello. He's here all week, folks. He's here all week. All right. Well, welcome to our panel today. We are going to talk about the state of freelancing and personal finance. Do you have a future? So that's what this panel is. If you want to know how to make tons of money in 60 minutes, that's Steve Chu next door. So this is your last chance.
Don't encourage going next door.
Yeah, you don't want to go over there.
Yeah. Well, no, if you all go over there, then we're done here. Yeah, so we do have some esteemed panelists here. First of all, we have Victoria Erridge. She leads the Quicken Loans Zing blog, and she has been she's had roles in public relations and banking for many years. She has a bachelor's degree in journalism, and she manages a number of blogs, and she's been doing this for a very long time. So she knows what she's talking about, which is nice. This is Karina Bailey. She's the managing editor at Credit Karma, formerly Bank Rate Insurance. Formerly, she was at Bank Rate Insurance. Credit Karma is, yeah. Anyway, she has a master's degree in creative writing and advocates strongly for personal education. This is Cameron Huddleston. She's an award-winning journalist. She has been in the personal finance space for more than 15 years. And when I first met her, she was at Kiplinger's. And now she is the life and money columnist for Go Banking Rates. This is Matt Schultz. He's a senior industry analyst at creditcards.com. He's written for usnews.com's money blog. He's appeared in multiple media. He has a journalism degree from the University of Texas, and he didn't put it in here, but he's also an award-winning journalist because you guys got an award for some of your coverage before, right? Mm-hmm. That's right. And he used to be my editor at one point, which is great. He helped me learn to be a better writer. And I am Miranda Marquardt. I've been freelancing for 11 years, and I just got hired as a senior writer at Student Loan Hero. So we'll go ahead and get started. And one of the first things that we did want to talk about is what is the state of freelancing in the personal finance world, because we all want to be able to make money in this field. We all want to be able to make money as freelancers. And so let's go ahead and start with that. Are you guys still looking for writers? Someone.
I can start. Yes, absolutely. Actually, we're looking for writers right now, but I think there's always going to be a demand for like long-form content. I think there are just so many types of content that you can write, and there are so many publications that are always looking. So to me, it doesn't seem like there's a shortage.
I would agree. I don't think that there's a shortage, especially of folks that actually have somewhat of experience writing for their particular niche. If they have a background in writing about personal finance or they're really good at a particular area, it's really helpful to a company or any type of outlet that they actually know what they're doing. They're not just starting out and I hear a bird. So that they're not just starting out and that they actually can contribute something that's, a little bit more high level. And that's what I think a lot of outlets are looking for, is someone senior that's able to take complex things and translate it for the everyday person and, get that out there.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a publication that has all the content it needs. Everybody is looking for content. Everybody wants good writers. Everybody wants good ideas. And because of blogs and because of how many sites are out there, there's a lot of work to be had. And I think it's actually a really good time to be a freelancer.
I agree.
And I would add that for companies, hiring a freelancer is a lot cheaper for them than having a full-time employee because they don't have to cover benefits. I am not someone who's making hiring decisions, but I know that the company I work for, Go Banking Rates, is always looking for freelancers. And I just learned this yesterday when I happened to bump into one of my Kiplinger colleagues. Technically, when I was with Kiplinger, I was considered a contract worker. But would you have called me a freelancer for Kiplinger? Not necessarily, because I was writing solely for Kiplinger. And Kiplinger, if any of you are aware, it was the very first personal finance magazine. It has a website, kiplinger.com. And Kiplinger, almost all of its staff was there in their offices in Washington, D.C. Did not do a lot of freelancing, but I've just learned that they are actually looking for some freelancers for their website. So this is a very well-known, well-established publication that typically did not rely on freelancers, and now, from what I understand, they are looking. So it's not just online-only publications, but publications that typically did not use freelancing are now turning to that so they can generate more content for the site, because these sites want, like you said, as much content. The more content, the more ad dollars, and more content means they need more writers to produce that.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit. What kind of writer are we looking for today? And when we were talking about this before, I can't remember who it was, but let's talk about a little bit. Does having a successful blog automatically make you a good writer? Is it somebody you want to hire just because they have a successful blog?
I'll take this. I would say no. I think you can be a successful blogger, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, a good writer will transcend mediums. So if you're a good writer for your blog, you're likely to be able to write for other publications as well. But I think that depending on the kind of rigor that's required by an organization, it can really affect whether or not you're a good fit as a writer. And also, I think a lot of publications like Credit Karma, for example, we really look for kind of high journalistic standards. And if you're writing in your personal blog, this may not be the kind of discipline which you apply to your blog, understandably, but it's a skill that can be learned, but may be required.
Yeah, and let's talk about that a little bit. One of you other three, she talked about high journalism standards. What kind of things are you looking for in terms of sourcing, in terms of looking for that sort of extra mile for a freelance writer?
I think there's a couple different things. So we talked about a little bit like the background. Like Karina said, you could have your own blog, but you might have a particular style, or you might have a favorite medium that you tend to use, and that might not necessarily translate to another company or organization's style guide or just the way that they deliver content. So I think you have to be adaptable. I think having good journalism skills is very important. You don't have to necessarily have had a journalism degree, but you need to understand how to take something that might be confusing to some and being able to explain it to people so that they understand it. And you also need to present it in a creative way. So that in a way you kind of need a little bit of creative writing skills as well, because you don't want your content to come off as dry or boring. You want it to be interesting, and you want people to actually continue to come back and visit what you're reading. So I think it's a combination of having journalistic integrity, knowing your sources, being able to know who to contact if you're not familiar with something so that you can get that expert feedback, and then also being able to make it interesting and shareable once it's actually published. And
Cameron, I wanted to ask you, since I think it's between you and Matt, who's been in this industry longer, but doing this thing longer. But some of the changes you've seen as far as freelancing or like online writing goes, from maybe the Wild West days before till now, I know in my personal journey, I've noticed that more of my clients are looking for my journalism background, where 6 years ago they didn't care. But now it's actually becoming something that they're actually looking for. Is that something you've seen, Cameron, or?
Well, I think as Karina said, certainly it's valued, and I know those of you out there who might not have a journalism degree might be thinking, well, how am I going to get hired? There are plenty of working journalists who actually did not have a bachelor's degree in journalism. I happen to have a bachelor's and a master's degree, but I know plenty of people who work as journalists who did not have a degree in journalism. So you don't necessarily have to have that degree, though, but you do need to be able to write well. And my biggest advice here would be, if you are writing a blog already, for example, and you might have your own voice and you write perhaps in a casual tone, you have a good following, and that's important. If you have a blog, you want your audience to relate to you on a personal level. but you have to leave some of that behind when you are going to be writing for a publication. It's not about you,
Right.
the blogger, anymore. It's about I am a writer. I am a vehicle for getting information through, and I have to put it in, like you said, Victoria said, in simple terms, explain it simply. And so what I would recommend is, if there are particular sites you think you want to write for, read as much as you can. Look at how those articles are written so that that can be your guide. And then, of course, read really outstanding publications such as the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, which have very strict journalistic standards, very strict writing standards, just to give you an idea of what is really good journalism. I mean, I remember my very first internship in college at a newspaper. I had yet to take a journalism course. So how did I figure out how to write like a journalist? Well, I just read the newspaper, and I kind of modeled what I was writing on what I was reading. And so if you're used to writing but not writing in a journalistic manner, read good journalism. Read the Wall Street Journal, read the New York Times, read the publications you want to write for to see what sort of writing they are publishing.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, for example, I write for usnews.com's blog, and one of the things that they're very strict about is that they don't want any first-person stuff. And for a blog, that can be a little bit challenging. But the other thing is that at creditcards.com and plenty of other sites that are out there, we do J-School 101 sort of articles, inverted pyramid, nut graph kind of stuff, but we also do blogs. So there might be opportunities for different types of writing within the same company. So it's important to do your homework.
And one thing to add is if you are starting a relationship with an outlet or an organization, you should feel free to ask if they do have a style guide that they have. For example, at Quicken Loans, any freelancers that we have, I send them a one-pager that gives them like the overview of what is expected and what our style is and what types of words we use, and just to encourage them to check that out besides reading the blog, but just kind of like what the expectations are. And I think that's really helpful because it gives the writer some parameters with which to work, and it also cuts down on the amount of editing that's required once it gets turned in.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit since you've brought up editing. How often do you guys find yourselves sending stuff back over and over and over again? And what kinds of major things do you see as problematic when people turn in their writing in terms of what you have to edit, whether it has to do with the style guide or whether it has to do with general grammar?
I think one of the things for us is sourcing. So we're really, really rigorous about sourcing at Credit Karma. And I think a lot of...
And real quick, sorry, is Wikipedia a good source?
Wikipedia is not a good source. So, yeah, I think a common error that writers can make is citing a secondary source that has pulled information from the primary source. So as writers, you should be going to the primary source and citing that. And I think one thing that kind of crops up fairly regularly is, so as I was mentioning, sourcing and fact-checking, but it's making declarative statements that kind of come off as opinion, come off as fact, but really read more like an opinion. And these need to be either fact-checked or sourced. They just need to have some kind of explanation for them because a declarative source just won't fly.
But just to explain to people who aren't familiar with this term, sourcing, so when you write an article, a journalistic article, it can't be according to you, the writer. You have to interview experts, which if you're writing about personal finance, that would likely be a financial planner, someone with some sort of financial organization. Like, for example, you reach out to Credit Karma and you say, I'm writing an article about credit. Do you have a consumer education person there I can interview? So I'm writing so they can give me advice on credit scores, or you use studies, research, and there are so many personal finance studies and research. They come out all the time, and as a journalist, I get get pitches from public relations companies telling me about these. But if you're not, on those lists yet because you are not established as a writer, you can easily find them. All you have to do is a Google search. You're writing about credit, and you want to know perhaps, what percentage of people have a credit score below 600. You just basically type in a Google search. What percent adults credit score below 600, and there's going to be a survey that's going to pop up that will tell you. Or you can go to a site such as Credit Karma, Experian, Equifax, one of the the major credit bureaus, creditcards.com. I'm sure you guys do surveys too. So you've got to have a survey or research, and when you write your articles, you include the quotes of the people and their title, and you provide a link to the company they work for so that your editor can go and check, does that person really work there? Does that person really exist? If you're citing a study or a survey, provide the editor a link to make it easy for them, because they have to check everything you write to make sure that you got it right. And it's not that the editors don't trust you. It's just that if they're providing information to an audience, they have to provide correct information so their site can remain credible. So that's kind of what sourcing is in a nutshell for people who aren't familiar with what that is.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how common it is for folks to not source stuff. And I don't do as much editing these days, but in the past, that was like the thing that always drove me crazy. Is it one way that you can really make your editor happy is to source really well and make their job easier.
Yeah, so other than sourcing, what are some of the other things that you tend to run into when you're editing somebody else's work? And what are the things that turn you off and say, okay, I cannot work with this person anymore?
I think the unwillingness to have a conversation about what the edits might be, because obviously we all have pride in our work, and we all think that what we've written has to the best of our ability, but it might not, like I said, match what that company is looking for, or what the essence of the story should have been. So I think just being open to accepting feedback, and that you might get it pushed back to you to make some alterations, and not take it personally, but just that there might be some differences in how it's written, or what's expected, or what kind of source you should have maybe reached out to, because there's different angles that you can take things, and just being able to accept that and not take it personally, but realize that it's just like a relationship so that you can continue to move forward with that company or organization and say, hey, this is a great person. They understand how we operate, what we're looking for. Because if you don't have that communication open, it's going to fail miserably. Like, they're not going to want to work with you. You're going to be defensive about your content. It just doesn't set up well after that. So I think just setting the expectation that there may be some feedback, and set that out from the beginning.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and a completely obvious one, but hitting deadlines, because again, it's a very simple thing, but and we all know that life happens. Sometimes you do miss a deadline, but again, communication, where if you know that something's going wrong, and you can say, hey, I may need another day or two because of this, that's the sort of thing that can really help out too.
And how do you guys feel about grammar?
I was just going to say something about grammar. Actually, I was.
That's the elephant in the room.
Because it is so important. If you cannot be trusted to write grammatically correct, I mean, if you can't get the noun and verb to agree, or you use that instead of which, or which instead of that at the wrong time, if you can't get something as basic as grammar correct, how can people trust you to get your facts correct? How's the editor going to trust you? How's your audience going to trust you? So everything you write, proofread it. And if you are not great at grammar, there's a website you can go to called Grammarly that there's one level that's free, and then there's like a paid level where it provides you more detailed information about your grammatical errors.
She's not being paid by Grammarly.
No, I'm not. I had never even heard of it.
No, I like the site too. I use it too.
I had never
I'm not being paid by
even
them
heard of
either.
it. My daughter was using it, and I was like, wow, this is genius.
Yeah, and I think we all understand that sometimes there are typos, and you're not going to turn in something perfect. But if you turn in something that is constantly riddled with errors and grammatical problems, you become more of a hassle. Would you say that?
Absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah, I just started editing, and it's a hassle. Good job, you guys.
So there's like a small thing from an editing perspective that I've built into like contracts with people that we work with is if it hits a certain amount of edits and it's just going nowhere, that we have the ability to reduce the amount that you get paid.
Nice.
And I think that that's fair on both sides, because if you're writing and you have to work that hard with somebody on both sides, like it doesn't make sense. Like you're not going to pay the full amount of money for someone who you have to push it back and forth 5-6 times versus someone that gets it right the first or second time. And then also for the writer too, it's not really, yeah.
Yeah, with some publishers, that's called a kill fee. So that's something that should be determined whenever you're signing your contract in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And speaking of pay, let's move on to pay. So here's a question for you guys. How much can writers expect to make? Not necessarily a dollar amount, but what kind of informs what you pay your writers? What informs the rate that they receive for the work? Who wants to start?
Okay, so for us, as I've already said, we demand like a lot of fact checking at Credit Karma, and a writer writes a first draft, and then generally it's another draft after it's passed through a couple of rounds of edits. So I think from a time perspective, I'm not really sure. It's going to vary from story to story, but we pay an amount that I think breaks down pretty well if you look at it from an hourly perspective. We also pay $50 for an accepted pitch. So if a writer sends us a pitch that we like and we decide to run with, they get paid for that. Again, though, we were talking about the difference between articles and blog posts. And in this case, we're looking for very detailed, very thorough, pretty time-consuming work. And so you should get paid commensurate with that. It can vary dramatically, I think, with, say, blog posts and other types of writing.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. When we were talking earlier about sourcing and journalism standards and that kind of thing, you can charge more if you're doing that.
Yeah.
If you're doing that, you can charge more. What are some of your other thoughts on that, panelists?
I was going to say, if you're just starting out and you don't have much published and you're thinking, well, how am I really want to write, but I don't have a portfolio of articles, you might have to start by basically offering your services for free or very low fee for a blog, just so you can get your name, your byline out there. And you can go to a bigger publication and say, you know, I've written for this blog, and here's my name on these articles, and I think I'm doing a really good job with what I'm writing, and would you consider me? And if you are new, you have to understand that you will be probably paid less than someone who's been doing it for many years and who is an established personal finance writer. Now, even within the personal finance field, different publications are going to pay different rates, and if you go, where the most money to be made is on the corporate side if you are writing for a corporate site such as a Fidelity or a T. Rowe Price or an investment firm or that sort of organization. They tend to pay more. And then even very niche publications like something for like a insurance organization or something along those lines, they will tend to pay more than just a general purpose news site or, personal finance site. So there will be variation in the pay. But if you're starting out, you should not expect to get rich on your first few articles that you write. It does take time, and the more you write and the more you develop your name and you build a reputation as a good, reliable writer who meets deadlines and writes without a lot of grammatical errors and is easy to edit, then you can start demanding higher rates.
I also think if you're able to contribute more than just body copy for a post. If you can do a graph or chart or anything that illustrates your points more, video addition, some type of infographic, anything else that's additional, I think you can build that into what your pay would be, because you're going above and beyond just copy. And I also think if you're willing to help promote it in any way, that's also helpful. Like if you have a social following and you're, pretty well known, like that's beneficial on both sides. So if you're willing to share something, I think that's built into it as well.
Yeah, and it is important to note that there are some major publications out there that will not pay you to contribute. And you're looking at them and thinking, oh, of course, they have the budget, and they probably do. But they're not going to pay you to contribute. And I see heads nodding. They're like, I've learned the hard way, I know.
Ariana Huffington, who has a ridiculous amount of money, she's making a ton of money off people writing for free.
Right.
And what I want to say is, like, this is my soapbox. You should not write for Huffington Post because nobody cares, anybody can do it, and it's not going to get you any money. And Ariana's already got plenty.
But all that said, to a degree, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish.
Yes, and let's talk about that.
Yeah, because a lot of my writing now is more of kind of thought leadership and kind of expanding the brand kind of stuff. So in that case, I would love to get in Huffington Post. Ariana doesn't have to pay me a cent. And it really is, sometimes you do have to make that decision about whether the brand or the paycheck is more of what you're trying to accomplish. So, and it's not always that cut and dry.
Yeah, and one of the things to consider, too, is some sites have a mix. So Forbes is a good example. The Forbes website, they've got their blogs on the one side that they don't pay you for, and then on the other side, they have the more professional journalist kind of writing that they do pay for. So it's important to understand your goals.
I was going to say, I forget the name of the publication, but isn't there one that lists publications that don't pay well or haven't paid? Isn't there's a resource out there? So maybe, does anyone know what I'm talking about? It mentions
There are quite a few of those.
Check them out. Make sure you see who isn't paying or
Google
isn't paying
Google
well.
places that don't pay. But that's a good point. You need to think about your goals. And are there times, though, like Matt was talking about, have any of you the rest of you seen times when it has been worth it to work for free just to get that big brand mention or to get some sort of social proof?
I have never worked for free.
I know, neither have I. I'm with you. I'm with you, sister. I've never worked for free either.
And that's what I get paid to do. And so, fortunately, though, one of the good ways to get your name into a lot of publications is to write for a publication that has syndication. And a lot of people are doing this now. So, when I was with Kiplinger actually had content sharing deals with Yahoo, and most of the traffic that came to Kiplinger was not people going to Kiplinger.com, but they would find the articles on Yahoo or MSN, and that would drive traffic back. Go banking rates, but the thing is, Kiplinger has, money is a direct competitor. U.S. News would actually be considered a competitor, so there's no content sharing there. Go Banking Rates, which is a smaller publication and is not a direct competitor with any of those big ones, we have content sharing with MSN. We have content sharing with Money. We have it with Huffington Post. We have it with AOL Daily Finance. We have it with Business Insider. We do with the Tribune News Service. And so my articles that I write are appearing in all those publications and in newspapers across the country, like newspapers I've never even heard of. and I, it's funny because every now and then I'll Google my name just to kind of see where my stuff has shown up. And I came across the site recently, and it shows all the different publications. And I was amazed because I've had my byline in nearly 200 publications through that syndication. And so if you write for one that syndicates with a lot of other sites, then your name is getting out there. So I would certainly encourage you, as you get experience, to look for a site that does that syndication. And a lot of sites are doing that now. And not even, bigger sites, but even smaller ones. I was just talking with one of the founders of Due.com, DUE, which is a payment service. And they have a blog, and they do syndication with, I think they said maybe Forbes and Inc. And so it doesn't even have to be a bigger site. Even smaller sites are doing this.
Oh, yeah. And then real quick, we do want to talk about pitches before we get to questions. So what is a good pitch? Let's please help them understand what they need to do to pitch you guys.
Okay. Mostly, flesh it out. First of all, know the publication that you're pitching to. So, as Cameron was saying earlier, read it in depth, see the type of content that's there, identify a gap or multiple gaps, and then you can pitch like that. I think one thing that really, really annoys me as an editor is if I get a generic pitch about my particular industry, which has already been covered on site multiple times. Clearly that person has not spent any time researching my site, seeing the type of writing that's there, and so that's an instant no.
I really think that, above all, don't waste the editor's time. Get to the point and make it real clear and concise with what you are trying to pitch and what you're trying to deliver. That's really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like the dear sir / madam. I'm like, oh, here we go. And then there's usually an error in the first sentence and a half, and that already turns me off. So also double check what you're saying, because if you can't simply write an email, I really don't want you to write an article about the largest purchase that someone's ever going to make, which is their house. So that's the kind of stuff that already, or I've had ones where they'll call me by my last name first. They'll say, hi, Erich. And I'm like, between Victoria and Erich, which one do you think might be my last name? So that already kind of turns me off because I feel like we're not football buddies. So just, basic stuff like that. And then also, like Matt said, including some examples of your work, what exactly you do. I've had good pitches where they say, I'm so-and-so, I write about these 3 topics, and here's why, you should take a look at my work. And then they give me some examples. See, dear Miss Erich, it's great. So I'm a freelance writer with 15 years of experience. Do you, need any stories? If so, I'm happy to pitch some ideas. Here are some of my examples of my work. Please contact me. These are the things that I've done in the past. And I'm going to stop and take a look at that because you took the time to mention my actual publication, call me by the correct name, you used proper grammar, you gave me your previous work, and you were pleasant and encouraged me to contact you. So I would say that, I know it sounds basic, but just take a minute and put the right person's name in there. I've also received pitches where some other company's name was in there. And it was very clear that they copied and pasted and just mass emailed a bunch of people. Mm-hmm. And if that's how you treat the work that you're trying to obtain, then how do you expect people to take you seriously? Kind of like we've heard in some of these sessions about the email blast. You shouldn't blast people. You should personalize and individualize people. So it's the same thing with the pitch. I would expect that what you send to Matt and Karina is going to be different than me or Cameron. So just personalize it. Take that extra minute and double check it, and it'll make all the difference, because the people that actually write something like that will actually hear from me.
Well, and I actually got a PR email today for something going on here at FinCon that said, Dear Lisa. All right.
Hi. All right. Well, so with that on the pitches, we do want to go ahead and make sure there's some time to answer a few questions. So if there are some questions, oh, wow. And it's off. Okay, we're off. Let's do this. All right, go ahead. We'll start with you in the black, please.
What I find is that, sure, because I feel like the next question is going to be, well, what's your great idea for a post?
Just a second. I need to repeat all the questions. No, that's cool. So I'm just gonna. I'm just gonna repeat that real quick for the recording. So the question is essentially about because this was a very general pitch asking for work as a writer versus a very specific pitch about a certain idea. So are you guys open to those types of pitches? And when do you prefer one over the other?
I would say that the ideal pitch will have both. It's going to lead with your big idea, and you're going to have your qualifications following up. I actually was going to say that one thing that I really like about this email is the readability of it. So this is a very simple thing, but format your pitch. So, keep your paragraphs small, break out bullet points where necessary. And because when you're an editor and you're scrolling through dozens of these a day and you come across a huge blob of text, you're not going to feel particularly inclined to read it.
I would say, too, because you happened to mention something about I have a great story to tell. This is something you have to be very careful about because the chances of being able to write an article based on your personal experience, I would say, are pretty slim. The columns, because I am a columnist, I will use my personal experience and I will say but that is because I am a designated columnist for a publication. If you are coming in as a freelancer to say, let me share my experience, there might be some interest, but I would say your chances might be smaller. They might say, it sounds like you have a really great story. Let me have one of our reporters interview you, and we will write about your story. But what I certainly would not do, ever, 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 is say, I wrote a blog post on this. Would you like to run it? Don't ever do that because publications want original content. So don't ever pitch. And I have gotten those. I sent in an example to Miranda. There's this guy, and first of all, I'm not the one making the hiring decision, so you need to make sure you're reaching out to the right person to begin with. But I get this guy who sends me stuff all the time. On our blog, we had a post. Would you like to share it? And I'm like, no, it's already been out there. We want something original. We're not going to take your blog post and then put it on our site because people have already seen it. And I know you might be thinking, well, how do I find the right person to contact? Because it's not always easy. You see the reporters' bylines, and that's why people will reach out to me. And if you have a nice reporter and you ask them, I read your stuff. I would like to write for the website. Could you give me the name of the editor? And if you reach a nice reporter, they might do that. And I do that. People will reach out to me, and I will turn around and tell my editors, this person really wants to write for our site. You should get in contact with them. But it can be hard because it's not always listed on the site's page. So sometimes you just have to do a little bit of stalking and maybe on LinkedIn, type in the name of the company, and it'll show the people associated with that company and then their titles, and you can reach out that way.
Yeah, social media can be really good for that because Twitter, especially like Twitter is such a journalism echo chamber that that editors and reporters and all of those folks are on there talking. So there's a good chance you can find folks on there.
Yeah, and I saw, Emily, you had a question?
My question is, are there any rules that can be broken or anything that, I feel like there's freelancing free everything on the internet and freelancing post everything on the internet. So there's some hoary old rules that are from print freelancing that I'm afraid online freelancers are following that they don't necessarily need to.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to go ahead and repeat it. The question was about what are some of the rules, how are some of the rules changing as we become more of an online type of society? Are there some of these old rules from the print days that we can break now that we're online? And I would go ahead and, because when she first said, what are some of the rules you can break, I would expand that in general to any rule that we can break, because, rules are made to be broken, right?
Actually, because I got my start in print journalism many, many years ago, what I have noticed certainly with online is you can be more conversational. Now, this does not mean that you can be conversational at the level you would find on a blog. Okay, so we're not thinking about talking to our best friend or our our peers, we're thinking about conversational in the way maybe you would talk to your grandmother. So no, like, YOLO or, that's not going to work, because if you're writing for a general audience, someone who is your grandparents' age, they're going to have no idea what that is. I had to think about that acronym for a little bit to figure it out myself, actually, the first time I ever heard it. But so, being conversational is good because you want people to engage with your writing. And it needs to be, it needs to have a good sound to it, a good rhythm. And so as you're writing, read it out loud to yourself to see, does it sound good? Is it, enjoyable to read? It doesn't need to be stiff, which I think one of you mentioned before. But you can be a little bit more conversational with online writing. It doesn't have to be quite so stiff. And sometimes I find myself writing and breaking. I just told you to be good with grammar, but I do find myself breaking a grammar rule every now and then. If it sounds really awkward to construct a sentence and not have that preposition at the end of the sentence, and then you have to switch it around and put the with whom or with which, and it just sounds so uncomfortable to write it that way. And so sometimes I will break a grammar rule and end a sentence with a preposition just because it sounds so much more natural. It sounds like you were actually giving some advice instead of writing some really dry manual on how to do something personal finance related.
Yeah, do any of the rest of you have rules that were made to be broken?
I don't have a rule that's made to be broken, but when you said that, Emily, I thought about there's someone that writes for us right now that he actually mentioned the fact that he was a newspaper writer for a very long time, and that was he was proud of that, and that he has this background of being able to do investigative journalism. He can get sources quickly. He can turn things around quickly. So he actually turned I'm going to be honest. Sometimes there's stuff out there that because of the way the internet is and the way that everyone's trying to get the story out before someone else, there's a lot of stuff out there that's just not even accurate. People just want to be the first to say something.
Wait, what?
Yeah. And so I think it's really hard sometimes to sift through a lot of the stuff that may or may not be true just because somebody said it. I mean, in a way, anybody could be, if you want to look at it, a journalist. If you're in a location where some epic thing is happening and you tweet about it, you're essentially on the scene telling people what's happening, right? And so people are seeing that on Twitter, they're seeing it on Facebook, whatever it is. So you could be getting your information from someone that has no ability to tell you what the real facts are, or has the ability to translate what's actually happening into things that you need to know. And so it's hard sometimes to decipher between who's just someone who's writing something and who's someone who actually knows what they're talking about and has that the credentials and the ability to do that. And so if you're able to do those basic things that we appreciate from journalists, even if you're not a journalist. I snagged a guy from the legal team to be on my team because he's an excellent writer. So what I'm saying is don't pigeonhole people. But being able to cut through all the other noise and find someone who's a legitimate contributor to your site is really, really valuable.
Okay, thanks. And I saw a question over here. Did you still have a question? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and repeat that. The question was, what is the policy of your publication in terms of liability clauses in contracts? And I think to some degree we can also expand this a little bit to talk about exclusivity to some degree, because I know that's a question many freelancers have as well.
I'm not really super familiar with the fine print on our writers' agreements, but what I do know is that the agreement is that the content is ours. So, once the freelancer is finished with it, then it's Credit Karma's. In terms of liability, I think we probably have some pretty rigid boilerplate language in there. What I would say about that is we're in an industry that's highly regulated, and I think we all are to some degree. So within the personal finance space, I would imagine that that's probably on the increase, especially because the FTC is watching all of us.
Right now.
It's looking at you through the camera on my laptop. Yeah, so let's talk about, do you guys demand exclusivity? I'm sorry, I just prod that in there. Do any of you guys demand that?
I'm not a fan of duplicate content and having.
Well, no, but I mean, it's
Like,
exclusive.
like-
only for us.
Yeah, in
Yeah,
terms of writing only
okay.
for us, yeah. So what are some of the limitations there? Because, I mean, obviously you can't duplicate your
Yeah.
content and sell it to somebody else
Yeah.
again. I mean, we hope that that's
It
fairly,
happens.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure it does, but we hope that we all understand that. But I mean, I've had clients of mine who say, "Oh, well, if you're going to write for us, you can't write for anybody else in the personal finance space." And I'm just like, you better be paying me enough to make up for everything else then.
Yeah, it's definitely not a exclusive. You write for us. You don't write for anybody else in the personal finance space. But there are some of our competitors who we're probably not going to have somebody freelance for us and for them too. So.
And you probably wouldn't want to do that. If you are writing for creditcards.com, you probably don't want to try to get a freelancing gig with credit.com because
We're
they
looking
would
at
be
you, Jason.
considered competitors, and it might not look so good if you're writing for another competitor's
Yeah,
publication.
and really so much of being a successful freelancer is establishing the relationship over time with the editor. And to just give you an example from my life, I was the editor-in-chief at an investing website and just got out of a meeting where my the rates that we were charging freelancers, or paying freelancers, not charging them, that'd be a whole other thing. Yes, I suspect you might know this story,
I understand
Miranda.
this story, yes.
But we had our rates slashed to the bone, and basically every other freelancer that we had stopped working for me except Miss Marquette here.
Because I love Matt.
And it meant a lot. And that's the kind of thing that can really establish relationships and can work for you over the years.
And I would like to say that during that situation, Matt really did, in fact, go to bat for writers because he understands the importance of making sure they're properly compensated. So finding a good editor, they're going to have a love fest up here, but finding a good editor who is willing to go to bat for you is very important as well. Were there any other questions? Jason. Okay.
I'm curious, when I talk to people from a traditional media background, I hear a lot about the art of pitching, and you've talked about that a little bit. Yet in my experience, to me, it's all been about building relationships. Being a freelancer, but almost like you're on staff, you're writing like 2 posts a week for an outlet every week. And it's just a matter of what are you going to write about. To what extent do you follow that old? Do each of you follow that old model of, hey, come to me with a good idea, and I'll give you a story, or the newer model, which is, I'm looking for X number of stories a week or a month from you. Let's work together to come up with ideas.
Okay, so the question is, with the changing model of content creation now, how often are we talking about, having to pitch one story at a time, or how often are you guys starting to just say, hey, let's build that relationship and ask for X number of stories over time? Anyone?
I think it's a little of both. I mean, it depends on the circumstance. It depends on the time. Like if you meet a freelancer here, and you get to know them, and you say, "Hey, throw me some ideas." In a couple weeks after the conference, that's great. But also, just kind of getting cold pitches is great too. It really just depends.
We're pretty flexible too. Like on the Quicken Loans Zing blog, we have an editorial meeting every couple weeks. So we discuss the topics that we know we want to plan out, obviously based on seasonal things and trends. But there's also things that we can't anticipate, news stories, whatever that might throw a wrench into things. So we're flexible. I think it's just important to keep that, like we said, the communication lines open. If you want to be like a one-hit wonder for a site and maybe only write once or twice, then that's one thing. But if you want to continue to have that relationship, then it's important to, I thought about 3 or 4 ideas that might be really great for your site. because maybe I'm just busy doing stuff and I haven't thought about it, and you've got some ideas that I'm like, you know what, that's great, and we don't really have the time to do it. Could you do it? So I think there's a little bit of both. Like, we know what we want to write, but we also don't know what we want to write, because you might have some ideas we haven't thought of. And if you can insert yourself and get that done for us, it's great.
I would also say that your newer model would apply to someone like you more strongly, who's an established writer. You're very well known, your name's out there. Might be a little harder to swing if you're a less experienced or a less well-known writer.
That's a good point. Sean, you had a question?
Yes, I was just wondering how you see writing and blogging in the next 5 years. It seems to me that the trend is more towards video content. And, for example, Mark Zuckerberg is pushing Facebook would be all video in 5 years. So I just want to know whether you see writing being relevant at all in 5 years.
Okay, the question. I got to repeat the question before everybody. I saw everybody's just like leaping for their mics. But I got to repeat the question for the recording. So the question was, how do you see writing in the next 5 years, due to the fact that so much is moving toward video and other media? So let's go for it, you guys. It's a race.
I would say what I'm seeing is a combination of both now. With Go Banking Rates, not only is there just an article, but there is a video there embedded within the article. And we have really switched to that model with providing a video with practically everything we write. And that is certainly a trend that I am seeing. I'm not seeing writing disappearing. I'm just seeing a combination of both. I guess maybe giving people kind of that option. Here's some information you can look at, you can read, and then here's a little shorter video that has some key takeaways to what this article is about. I don't think within the next 5 years, maybe way out in the future, but within the next 5 years, I would not see writing disappearing, because there's still just a lot of people out there in older age groups, and that's how they want to get their news. I mean, to be honest, I prefer to read something rather than watch a video. I'm online all day, and so it's just, I want to read it, and I feel like if I'm going to watch it in a video, I'm going to miss something important if I'm just watching it, or there's not enough information there necessarily for me. So I don't see writing disappearing. I just think that there's going to be more of that combination of both in articles.
Okay, and Karina, you're just chomping at the bit. Go.
I would say video is such an intensive, heavy resource that I don't think that publishers are going to throw all their eggs into one basket for quite a while. I think, as Cameron was saying, it's very much going to be both. But currently video, as a content medium, I think if you're using content for business purpose, if you have conversion in mind, video is still not necessarily a really great direct path to conversion. And for that reason alone, until those kinds of things start to get better, I think that there's always going to be room for content, written content.
Oh, go ahead. It's 2 quick points. So I don't think writing will ever go away, because, typically there's 3 different ways that people learn or consume. They either like to read it, they like to hear it, or they like to have a hands-on approach. And so and my second point is, if you think about it, writing will be involved for all those other mediums as well. You wouldn't just go on a videotape and just start blabbing unless you're like a reality TV show. But we can argue that that's
or
scripted
Facebook Live.
too.
Let's talk about Facebook Live.
Yeah. So even if you don't write the whole thing, you usually have a framework or an outline from which you're working from. Same thing with an infographic. You don't just toss a bunch of stuff up there. You have an outline. What are you going to say? How are you going to do it? Podcast. What are you going to be talking about? Who are you going to interview first? There's always going to be words that matter, no matter what medium that you have to use, and you can't just forego the art of writing because of the medium with which you're delivering the content.
But I also really believe that writers would be well served to get comfortable being able to be on video. And there's never been a better time than now. There's never been more tools to help you prepare and to become better with video, because literally all you need to do is take your phone and kind of talk to yourself and practice. I feel like an idiot when I do it, but I do it all the time. And it's amazing how it's just like being an athlete, getting in your reps. The more often you do it, the better you get. So.